Hi, I'm Margaret De Rouleaux, and this is Act 3. We have a very special guest today, Congressman Tim Bishop from the 1st District of New York. I'm so glad you could come,
Happy
Congressman
to be here.
Bishop.
Thank you.
And we're getting very close to Election Day. We have, another 10 or 11 days?
11 days.
11 days from now, and then you can probably relax a little bit. And
I'm not very good at relaxing.
okay. Well, then you can go back to work.
Yep.
That's good. Okay, so it's a very interesting year because it's the midterms and everybody's concerned about what's going to happen, and we really need to know who are the people going to be there for us in our Congress and obviously in our Senate. And you have been a congressman on the East End now for
8 years.
Wow, so this is going to be your 5th term.
Yes.
And you really know your job. You've done a lot of things for us. And I understand you have some other plans to continue doing that and to tighten up on the things that we really need. One of the things that is pressing right now in the community is taxes, obviously, and Social Security and Medicare. So why don't you just tell us what we're up to?
Okay, well, I think the overarching priority of the next Congress for the next 2 years and the administration for the next 2 years has to be to put this country back to work. I mean, we need to focus with laser-like precision on strategies that will create jobs. And I think that we have put in place strategies that have had some success. We need to continue that effort and we need to expand that effort because we have millions of people out of work, and we're never going to allow them to have the quality of life they need to have if we don't put them back to work, and we're also not going to have the kind of economic recovery we need to have if we're not going to get them back to work. So that's job one. It is a job for both the government and for the private sector. And I think that that's certainly something that I've been working very hard on, and frankly with some success. I mean, the Suffolk County unemployment rate is only 6.9%, whereas nationally it's 9.5, 9.6. Long Island continues to add private sector jobs on a year-to-year basis, and so I think that we have had some success. That is in part a byproduct of the stimulus. Suffolk County received more stimulus money than any other county in the state of New York outside of the 5 boroughs. So that's something I'm very proud of and something that I think is working. You raised the issue of Social Security, and this is a very important issue from a couple of different dimensions. The most important issue right now is a cost of living adjustment for Social Security recipients. As you know, the Social Security trustees who make this judgment, Congress does not, have announced that there will be no COLA for 2011. My own view and the view of a great many of my colleagues is that that's wrong. And so I'm a co-sponsor of a piece of legislation that will be voted on the week of November 15th that would provide seniors with a $250 COLA for 2011. I urged my leadership to schedule a vote on that issue as quickly as possible. They have agreed to do so the week of the 15th of November, and I very much hope it passes, and I hope it passes with bipartisan support.
Are you getting support?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are over 200 Dems who have signed on to or expressed their support for the legislation. Remarkably, not a single Republican has yet. I'm not quite sure what that's about because I hear them talking about it all the time and hear them blaming Democrats for why there is no Social Security quota, which is completely inaccurate. But now here's an opportunity to solve the problem, and they're not joining in the solution. So I'm not sure what that's about.
You know, it's kind of interesting. There's so much information available to the world because of the internet. It seems that we are getting more involved in disinformation than real information in many areas. You just mentioned that Congress does not set Social Security, and it's set by the Social Security Trust. Yes. Who knows that? I mean, other than people who are involved in it. I didn't know it. I mean, it's not, and it's not that I don't pay attention to things that are going on, but I think that we all are underserved to a degree by lack of instruction or lack of information. What we get is this pounding advertising that is often dead wrong, or semi-wrong, which is probably worse, and people are making their own impressions from mis and disinformation that they're getting.
It's a very serious problem, very serious problem. I think the growth of talk radio and talk TV. I think the kinds of very biased outlets like Fox News, I think have diminished the dialogue that we need to have. And I really think that the way rumor and false statements whip their way through around the internet, I think it's a disservice to the kind of informed discourse that we need to have in order to solve our problems. We're not going to solve our problems when we approach them from the vantage point of anger. We're not going to solve our problems when we approach them from the vantage point of misinformation. We're only going to solve them if we can come together as reasonable people, both sides of the aisle, and try to find solutions that we can agree on. And that's made all the harder when people are pushed into polarized positions based on the anger that's out there.
And all the negative advertising, which is sponsored by outside influences that don't even have to show who they are. I mean, that's really been coming up lately.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the midst of a campaign now. There have been 2 outside groups that have come in and then spent $600,000-700,000 running attack ads against me. They don't have to report their donors. They don't have to specify how they've come to take the positions they've taken. And frankly, much of what they say is simply inaccurate. But they're totally unaccountable. Yeah. They can do this, and they are doing it all over the country to the tunes of tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars.
It really is an outrageous thing. And again, people often believe the last thing that they hear.
Yes.
Or see on the television, because, and obviously it must be true, it's on TV, we just saw it. And it's very distressing. I mean, negative advertising is, very unpleasant anyway. And I guess everybody engages in it to a degree. But when it's so blatant, and I got a robocall last night, late. It was outrageous. I mean, but I happen to know something. Again, and I've read something, but to hear it, it was a little old lady voice, and it sounded very convincing of what was terrible thing that was going to happen if we did certain things in this.
There's unfortunately an enormous amount of that, and a lot of it is misinformation or disinformation or simply outright lies. And it's unfortunate. It really is unfortunate. I will say I think it demeans the political process, and I think it is insulting to the people that we seek to represent. But unfortunately, political speech is highly protected speech, and so the barrier or the line, so to speak, that has to be reached to have that speech be considered slander or libel is almost impossible to meet. So.
There's an element of something in it that you really couldn't prove it.
Yes,
that it were wrong. So you're always very optimistic. I mean, I think you have been for the whole duration of your terms, and I think that that's very significant. That doesn't mean we don't have to work hard. And you're talking with me about how important it is to create jobs and how important it is for people to feel very positive about what's going to happen to them. And I really think that, on the East End, we are so sometimes alien from the rest of the community because of being the kind of destination place, the most beautiful beaches in the world, all of these things that people are addressing. A lot of people don't even think that we have any problems here, that we're all rich, that we all have a beautiful home to live in. And quite frankly, we don't all have that. Yeah. And I think it really needs to be addressed, and I really think everyone needs to know about it.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And the First District of New York, my district, is a very diverse district. We have pockets of great wealth. We have pockets of deep poverty. But the bulk of the district is a middle-class district. This is a middle-class, working-class district. And so when I go to vote, I grew up in that kind of family. I grew up in a family where my father worked for the New York Telephone Company. He climbed poles for a living. When I go to vote, what's uppermost in my mind is how is the issue that I'm about to vote on going to impact the kind of family that I grew up in. And the kind of family I grew up in is the kind of family that is the vast majority of families in the First District. So I'm very focused on middle-class families, and I'm very focused on what their needs are, what their aspirations are, and how the government can help.
You'd been involved before you were congressman in the educational system, higher education.
Yes.
And that's very significant here too. everyone tells you if you don't have a good education, you're not going to get a good job. And I'm curious to see how can the government at large help us in terms of that.
Well, let me say a couple things. First off, I have become one of the leaders on higher education policy in the Congress. I'm one of the few members of the Congress that comes from a higher education background, and I think I'm the only member of Congress that has ever administered the principal student financial aid programs that the Congress, that the government maintains. There are two numbers that give me great concern. One is that we have moved from first to sixth in the world in the proportion of our high school graduates who go on to college. And second, we have moved from first to 12th in the world in the proportion of our population that has a college degree. Neither one of those numbers bode well for our future. And we have to work very hard, excuse me, at turning that around. And I have been intimately involved in the passage of several different pieces of legislation, all of which are designed to improve access and affordability for our young people so that they can go to college. I was one of the principal architects of the student loan reform bill that is lowering the cost of borrowing, making it more simple to borrow, and taking the money that is going to be saved by that and increasing the amounts of money available for a need-based grant program called the Pell Grant. So I've been very involved in the reauthorization of the Higher Ed Act, and again, moving that act in the direction of facilitating access and affordability. So I'm very proud of what we have accomplished over the last 4 years in higher ed, and I believe that millions of students are going to benefit from what we've done, and as I said, I was at ground zero of that, so I feel I'm very proud that my service in the Congress is going to help millions of young people go to college and get their slice of the American dream.
Very, very important. And I live here. I live right on the East End, so our concerns are for our general population here. My concern is, and I work within the community on certain things, particularly with developing programs for people who are hungry. Everyone talks about food pantries and how they're underserved and they really need more money. And I'm very active in that community, and we really are in great need. Now, there's a lot of pressure, and I don't know where this is coming from, that the government shouldn't be doing so much for us. Get the government off our backs. I don't want the government running all these programs or doing all these things. And yet, how are things going to happen for people who are in need, who are on fixed incomes, who don't have jobs because there's no work to be had? How are they going to feed their families? How are they going to do certain things? How are they going to educate their kids without the help of the government?
Look, there are some problems that are either so large or so intractable that only government can solve them. There are other problems where government can, in effect, create the environment in which there is a private sector or a not-for-profit solution to the problems. But let's be honest. The private sector involves themselves in issues where they think they can make a profit. Feeding the homeless is not an issue where the private sector thinks they can make a profit. Sending kids to college is not an issue where the private sector thinks they can make a profit. So, what we need is a balance. We need to have government do the things that it does best, and we need the private sector to do the things that it does best. And we need the government, as I said, to create the environment in which the private sector can flourish and in which the not-for-profit sector would have the support that it needs. So there's a balance here. I think the tendency on all sides is to go too far in any one direction, where government does everything, which I certainly don't support, or where the private sector takes over everything, which again is certainly something I don't support. As with almost everything else in life, we need some balance. And we need the entities that exist to do what they do the best and where they can deliver the most good.
Now, do you find that in your small group, now you have your own contingent of Long Island congresspeople.
Yes.
Do you all get along?
We do. We get along great. There's 4 Democrats and 1 Republican. We get along great. We really have come together time and time again to speak with one voice when it's an issue that has an impact on Long Island. And so we stop being Republicans or Democrats and we become Long Islanders. In fact, we're first and foremost Long Islanders. And whatever political or partisan difficulties we might have, we set them aside to do what's best for Long Island and for New York, for that matter. And that's something that I like very much about the Long Island delegation, that we're focused on serving our constituents and delivering for them, not on what might be referred to as a partisan agenda.
It's interesting when when you see something, when you see the larger picture of Congress, and you see there's always somebody who's up front further than the others. People love to be on camera or not, and then you'll see the most outspoken people get the most press. And I'm just curious to see if does everybody notice that, or do you all just go back to your offices and do your job anyway when you see somebody grandstanding or somebody doing something foolish?
What I'm about to say is general, and I don't want anyone to interpret it as a comment on the Long Island agenda, which I think are people who work very hard and very cooperatively together. There are some members of Congress that are show horses. There are some members of Congress that are workhorses. I think the Long Island delegation is comprised of workhorses. There are members of Congress from all over the country that are show horses. We all know it, and that means that the right thing to do there is to simply for us to continue to do our jobs. And it's really not about who gets the credit. It's whether or not we have served our constituents. And I'm a firm believer that if you do your job as well as it can be done and work as hard as you can work, your constituents are going to notice. I firmly believe that.
There's, 535 congresspeople?
Well, there's 435 members of the House and 100 senators.
Right, okay. So do you all know each other to a degree? Would you recognize each other?
Oh, I think we would certainly recognize one another. There is not, neither the House nor the Senate are or is the collegial place that they each once were, and that's unfortunate. The House is 435. Most members know at least 2/3 to 3/4 of all the members, but there are members who don't know one another. If you don't serve on the same committees as them, if you're not engaged in the same activities, sometimes it's hard to get to know people. I'm one of the members of Congress. This is sort of a personal thing, but there's a bunch of us that play baseball, Republicans and Democrats, and so the closest relationships I have are the people on both sides of the aisle that I play baseball with. In fact, one of my closest friends in the Congress is a man from South Carolina named Gresham Barrett. He has the 4th most conservative voting record in the Congress. So we are very different politically.
But he's a good ball player.
Well, he's not only is a good ball player, he's a wonderful man.
Is he? Yeah.
And so we have established a very, very warm friendship, one that I cherish. It started by playing baseball with him. I really often think that if there were more relationships of the type that Gresham and I have, we might be able to get more things done in a more collegial way, because even though we have great differences in terms of our views on public policy, we have great respect for one another, and we think we could work some things out together.
That's a very nice thought.
Yeah.
And it's good to hear it, because if you looked at it, or if you watched it on cable news in any channel, you're going to think, oh, these guys hate each other, or it's not a pleasant
what's
place.
interesting is there's a great many members have personal relationships that a person looking in from the outside would think were impossible. That they would see somebody who's very partisan in his or her public positions being very friendly with someone who's very partisan in his or her public positions, and they're the exact opposite. So there's lots of friendships. What we really need to work on is translating those friendships into public policy initiatives where we seek common ground, and we try to move forward in a way that's much less contentious than the way we've been functioning over the last at least over the 8 years that I've been in the Congress. There's been very little bipartisanship. There was very little bipartisanship when I was a member of the minority. There's very little bipartisanship now that I'm a member of the majority.
So, as you enter your 5th term, what are you hoping to accomplish this next time around?
Well, first off, I'm hoping to have a 5th term. I need.
I'm being very positive.
Well, okay, and I'm being very cautious. But
Okay.
I take nothing for granted. I've spent my whole life taking nothing for granted, and I'm not going to start now.
Not starting now. Okay.
But what I hope to accomplish are a couple of things. As I say, nationally, the big picture issue is putting this country back to work. A second huge national issue is keeping people in their homes. Real estate is one of the issues that led us into the very deep hole that we're in. Real estate is one of the issues that's going to lead us out of this very deep hole. So we have We have to focus on foreclosure mitigation efforts that really work. We're starting to get some success. For every one foreclosure. The government programs that have been put in place have prevented 2. So people are 2 to 1 are still in their homes, which is very important. Locally, I have some things that I feel very strongly about. We have got to push the Montauk to Fire Island Point reformulation study over the finish line and see to it that it is as focused on East End issues as it is on Western Suffolk issues. We have to deal with the issue of the estate tax as it relates to family-owned farms, something that's very important and an issue that I have, I've received an assurance from my leadership that when we assess estate tax reform, they will take up a bill that I have authored that would exempt family-owned farms from the estate tax so long as the farm remains in agricultural use, something that's very important. I think we need to continue to provide assistance to our schools in the form of federal aid. The greatest burden that East End homeowners have is in the real property tax, and
Absolutely.
the real property tax is driven at least 70% by the school tax. About the only thing the federal government can do there is take on more of the expenses that local government is now doing. That's what we did through the Recovery Act. It was $160 million worth of federal money that came to Long Island schools. There was a study done that said that held down the tax rate, that had we not done that, taxes would have increased by an amount 3 times what they actually did increase. Unacceptable. And I was at ground zero of making that happen. I'm very proud of that.